You can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine. Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all keen. Ooh yeah. Ooh yeah.
Hello there, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen. And if it's your first time here, welcome. This is a show where we're trying to take a more journalistic look at all things legal cannabis. I'm a broadcaster in Chicago. I've been doing news on the radio for about 15 years now, and I do some voiceover work with SAG-AFTRA. I also did traffic with iHeart for a long time in different markets around the Midwest of the U.S., so you may have heard me at some point on the air. And a few years back, when Illinois, where I live, legalized cannabis recreationally, I was very excited to start talking about it in an official capacity. I've been a personal cannabis user for going on about 20 years. I was introduced to it by friends after high school, and as I was in college, I found that it helped with things like mainly helping me get to sleep at night and stay asleep, and that was the biggest thing that helped me decide to kind of keep it a part of my life. Even when we were partying with alcohol or anything else there, I always slept so great using cannabis, and that has continued to be the case all these years later. And so when it was legalized recreationally here, I figured I would be bringing this topic and information about it to the mainstream radio stations where I worked and other legitimate channels, and that still has yet to happen. We're here, I'm recording this now, May 23rd of 2025, and that reality still has not materialized. Even though cannabis is legal recreationally in half the country, about 24 or 25 states now, and medically legal in 38 states, almost 40, as well as medically legal in European countries across the world, and you'll hear a lot more about that with my guest today. The propaganda from last century, the lingering stigma around cannabis from the various efforts during the 1900s to kind of besmirch it, that still is lingering with us today. And there are a lot of people out there who may or may not be able to benefit from cannabis, but they've never given it a shot because of all the things that they've heard about it over the years, that it's the devil's lettuce, that'll turn your brain to scrambled eggs, and all of these kinds of things, although it is a plant that we humans have been using for thousands of years. I mean, we had archaeologists this year uncover a funeral from China 2,500 years ago, and there were remnants of indica cannabis at that funeral. And it's only been prohibited, cannabis has, in its current state since 1937. That's when the prohibition of cannabis took off earnestly. J. Edgar Hoover, the first iteration of the FBI, Henry Anslinger, these were the first and original, really, architects of the prohibition of cannabis. And then it kind of got supercharged after the 60s. Richard Nixon came in, and during the Vietnam War and all of that, it was very much on brand for him to sort of wage the war on drugs. And he even admitted, audio was uncovered recently as well, he admitted to his inner circle that he knew cannabis wasn't that bad, but they could not admit that publicly because it went against their theme of being tough on drugs. All of that to say that cannabis is something that can provide healing and can provide some relief from so many of the negative quality of life issues that we all deal with. And more people should be willing and open to give it a try. And that is really what made me start this Cannabis Man podcast. I want to be clear, this is not something that I believe is right for everybody. I always try and make that clear on the show. I'm not here preaching that everyone in the world cannabis is right for them, and I'm not preaching that the people who have tried it and had a bad time, they just didn't do it the right way, or they just, you didn't try the right product or anything. I believe people when they say they tried it and they experienced it and it's not for them. I respect rational adults. I know plenty of intelligent people who I believe when they say that, yeah, cannabis just isn't their vibe. That's totally cool. Doesn't really change my feeling about it one way or the other. doesn't make me think twice about my usage of it. It's totally okay to enjoy something when somebody else, even someone you respect, doesn't. Disagreement is kind of the spice of life. We all are allowed our opinions. We're all allowed to feel about things and substances and topics the way that we do. And just because somebody else likes it or dislikes it doesn't change whether it's right for you one way or the other. So even though I'm here trying to spread more education about the cannabis plant and give you some information, I like to track news headlines on the show. I'll tell you about the most recent developments. There's a few articles that I'm going to share with you today. One state's House passed a full-on THC ban. I'll tell you about where that happened. There was word out of the White House in terms of the rescheduling timeline. There's some blame going around about why it's taken so long. There's an article out of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, talking about the relationship between alcohol and cannabis. I've also got some products to tell you about, some exciting beverages, and one product, the type of which I have never tried before, or I had never, and I had some experience with that this week. Really looking forward to kind of telling you a little bit about how that went. And I always try and bring to you an expert conversation on these episodes. I like to speak with people, whether they are entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies bringing cannabis products around the world or services, or they're politicians, people who are responsible for creating or enforcing laws which may or may not be the foundation for legal cannabis going forward. Of course, I'll talk with doctors or researchers as well, people prescribing medical cannabis or studying it in their labs, whether they're at a university or just a laboratory somewhere around the world, things they're finding out, answering questions we still have about cannabis. Or I'll talk with journalists and other people covering it in this space as well. Anyone in the space that I think can bring some valuable information to you, I will endeavor to have them on the show, and I have one such guest this week. He is the CEO of a pharmaceutical cannabis company, and they have the most products being offered globally. And so he offers some of his perspective from the years he's been in cannabis and a global perspective for somebody who's hopping around different countries which are legalizing medically and kind of, jumping through all the regulatory hoops, which I can only imagine how many headaches this guy has to deal with. But he's got some excellent perspective, and I'm going to share that with you through our conversation a little later in this episode. If you would be so kind, and if you haven't already, leave a rating or a review for this podcast, whichever platform you're listening on, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. You can leave a certain amount of stars for this episode. You can leave a comment. You can subscribe to the show so you'll never miss new episodes. All of that is very much appreciated. You can also follow the show at C-Man Podcast on social media. And there's a new way to get in touch with the show. You can call 872-269-2403, or you can text that number as well. Text, leave a voicemail or anything like that, and I will get your message onto the show. Any questions I ask, any debate topics I bring up, any news headlines you have an opinion about, feel free to dial 872-269-2403 via phone call or text. Anything at all, your message is appreciated, and I will get it onto the show. And so, without further ado, let's get into this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
All right, there's the theme, the original theme from this show when I first started it 3 years ago, and the fact that this show has reached 90 countries. Listeners in 90 countries around the world have checked out the Cannabis Man podcast, and this has made it to the top of the charts on Good Pods and Listen Notes. Both have recognized it as one of the top cannabis podcasts in indie news, along with Society and Culture. And Listen Notes, which is kind of like Goodreads, but for podcasts, they have this whole engine that ranks ranks all of the podcasts and everything. They estimate that there's well over 5 million podcasts around the world, and they have listed this one in the top 10% of that. So that makes me feel really, really good, since this is just something I'm doing on my own. It's sort of a passion project of mine to try and destigmatize cannabis however little way that I can, along with providing you some information and hopefully some entertainment that'll move things forward as we all watch this green frontier of legal cannabis expand all the time. And on that note, another green frontier has been expanding thus far in 2025, and by that I just mean the changing of the seasons. We are now well into spring. We're just about at summer. We're a few weeks away from the summer solstice, and it's a time of year I always love for a lot of different reasons. This weekend that I'm recording this is Memorial Day weekend. It's kind of the unofficial start of summer here in the United States. So it just puts in mind barbecues and cookouts and a lot of the, fun outdoor activities I think we all like to do in the summertime with warmer weather. Some lawn games, just kind of cozying up in a hammock outside, reading a book, taking a walk with some ice cream, getting your dog out, around the park, or taking your kids for a walk by the water. Any of that stuff which is really appealing outdoors, just spending more time in nature among the green, and of course enjoying your own green as you're out there. Summertime is just the best for that, and Memorial Day always kind of puts that in mind for me. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend spending time with your family. And for me personally, Memorial Day also, my birthday always falls around Memorial Day. It's May 25th. I was born in 1987, so I'm turning 38 this weekend. And our plan's pretty low-key. I'm going to be working my normal shift at WGN Radio tomorrow morning from when I'm recording this, Saturday the 24th. I'll be on the air from 5 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. doing news at the top and bottom of the hour. So if you're around the Midwest and you turn to 7:20 a.m., you'll hear me there, or you can check the stream, WGNradio.com, wherever you are in the world. And if you tune in at those times, you'll hear me do the news and such. But for Sunday, on my actual birthday, Gretchen, my wife, along with my daughter Violet, we're all going to go up to my grandma Betty's, who lives in Milwaukee. And the family's gathering there for a cookout, celebrating Memorial Day and the birthday, and just kind of getting together, having some good family time. There'll definitely be some libations consumed, and I'm, of course, going to be bringing some cannabis products that I can't wait to share with my family, and just kind of toast another lap around the life ball that is something to do, around the birthdays. As even though the birthdays may seem sometimes, I think, less special as the years roll on, it is worth celebrating. It is worth taking time to just remember the happy moments in your life that have come between when we were all born, when you arrived at this party, and today. Life goes pretty fast. I think we all have lots of stuff that ties up our focus and attention all the time. And especially today, it feels like we're getting pulled in so many different directions, so many competing factions trying to divvy up our attention into smaller and smaller bits. Sometimes it's really important to just put all that away, seclude yourself with the people that matter most to you, and just celebrate that you're still here. Celebrate that we're still at this party, because every minute that we are is another opportunity for things to change in incredible ways. And yeah, I mentioned after the open how this show has grown from just an idea I had as cannabis became more legalized over the past decade and such. And in the last 3 years, like I said, for this show to have reached listeners in 90 countries, and for me to still be here doing this, talking with people who I'm so fascinated to hear from, and sharing with you all the developments of legal cannabis. I mean, I definitely wish that we were further along the path. I definitely expected that it would be rescheduled to Schedule 3 by this time. But things aren't always perfect. Things definitely don't always turn out the way that we'd like. But we're still here, and I'm glad to still be here. And I've got a product here. I was going to save this for a little bit later, I suppose, but given that this feels like a proper moment to cheers, I will crack this open so I can share it with you and just kind of toast and get the birthday weekend started a little early here. So, cheers to you. Hope you have a happy and celebratory Memorial Day weekend, and thank you for being here with me. Cheers. Oh, yeah. Now this... I'm just going to dive right in here. This refreshing beverage that I just cracked into, one of the products that I tried this week, it is from my friends at Wynk. W-Y-N-K. I've talked about Wynk on the show a few times before. I've spoken with Phil McFarland, who is the GM of Warehouse Beverage, which owns Wynk, and the CEO of Wynk itself, Angus Rittenberg. Talked with both of them. I love what they're doing at Wynk in terms of the innovation they made in terms of production, how to guerrilla style produce beverages state by state when the regulations were as rough as they were. But now with the hemp having been legalized with the 2018 Farm Bill, they don't have to do it as guerrilla style. They can ship this around. But the products, the flavors of these seltzers that they make at Wynk are just fantastic. And the reason that I'm cracked one open here on this episode, and the reason I cracked another one open on this episode, something I've definitely done many times before, but this particular Wynk is a brand new flavor. Just debuted this week on the 21st. It is Mandarin Pomelo. Mandarin Pomelo. Very subtle, like a lot of the Wynk flavors are. It is not overpowering at all. It's also what I like, somebody who sometimes gets heartburn from various seltzers. Wynk does not give me that. The bubbles are refreshing, but the way that they carbonate it does not mess with my esophagus or my, internal digestion at all. So I really like that too. But this Mandarin Pomelo, I guess the flavor that I get, when you smell it, I feel like you get a little of the mandarin. It's got that light orange spice to it. Even when you're just when you just smell it out of the can, you get a little bit of citrus notes. But when you're tasting it, I feel like the mandarin barely comes in. It's kind of there on the aftertaste. After you swallow and you exhale, that's where the mandarin just slightly makes its presence known. And I'm a big fan of that subtlety. I cut out soda from my, life a long time ago. I remember, I think it was for a Lent season. I was raised Catholic. I've talked about that on the show before too, but not. I wouldn't say I'm much practicing these days, but I was raised Catholic. I did the whole Catholic school thing. I was confirmed, did all the sacraments. I went to 2 years of Catholic high school. And for Lent one year when I was like 14, I cut out junk food. So no chips, no soda, none of that stuff. And I dropped something like 15 or 20 pounds like over the course of that Lenten season. And I just never really went back to it the same way. When I hit 21, I did start having some soda with alcohol. I would do like what I called a Captain Dougal, which was Captain Morgan and Dr. Pepper. It's definitely a drink that my friends and I frequented quite a bit in our early 20s. But then after a couple of years, by my mid-20s, I faded the soda out and I was just drinking stuff neat, fewer cocktails and more just like the neat alcohol. And these days, I'm drinking less alcohol than I have, ever since my late teens. That's, an admission for sure. But even before I was kind of like legal at 21 at parties and whatnot, as well as working at a Miller distribution warehouse, I had access to plenty of alcohol. So from that time until my, I would say, late 30s, I was drinking plenty. And these days now, as I, am on the precipice of 38 properly here, I'm just drinking less alcohol than I feel like I have as an adult. And that's in large part due to cannabis. And there's a story from Normal that I'm going to talk about later in this episode that really gets into that. Just briefly back to this Wynk seltzer here. I don't know that I've ever tried something with pomelo in terms of a flavor. But whatever that is, it does add this kind of exotic spice to the citrus of the mandarin. Mandarin is obviously a flavor I think most people are familiar with, kind of that tart orange sort of a flavor. But the pomelo in this Wynk gives it a little mysterious something extra. And I just think, in general, these Wynk seltzers are fantastic for summer, but I think this one, with that citrusy aftertaste and the refreshing carbonation, this is the kind of thing that I'm definitely going to be having at these summer cookouts and these barbecues and gatherings. I'm going to be bringing some up to my grandma's on Sunday, for sure. But I really like what they're doing at Wynk, and I enjoy this new flavor the Mandarin Pomelo. And you can find these whether you're at Binny's around Chicagoland, whether you're at bars or grocery stores. If you're in a cannabis, or rather, if you're in a hemp legal state, look around in your bars, look around in your grocery stores and your liquor stores and stuff. You will find Wynk, W-Y-N-K. I'm a big fan of the black cherry. I'm a big fan of their cran blood orange. And now I like this Mandarin Pomelo quite a bit too. Their tangerine one's also very good, but I don't think I've tried a Wynk I didn't like. Some of the flavors are more subtle than others. I would put this Mandarin Pomelo at the more subtle end, but very refreshing. Just like all the Wynks, 0 calories, 0 sugar, no fat, no carbs, no sodium, none of that stuff. A lot of zeros on this nutrition label, yet it is refreshing, subtle flavor, great for the summer. So keep up the good work, my friends at Wynk. Cheers, and thanks for sending this new flavor, Mandarin Pomelo. I talked earlier about how it seems like more and more people, companies, more and more forces out there are trying to divvy up our attention into smaller and smaller pieces. And there's a great book I'm reading right now called The Siren's Call by Chris Hayes. I guess he's a host on MSNBC. It's not a network I really watch much, so I was not familiar with the guy, but he's written other books, and I hadn't read those either. This is kind of my first introduction to this person as an author or any kind of content creator or anything. But I was intrigued because the topic is about the information age in which we are all living right now, and what is known as the attention economy, something that has become more and more clear as we move through this 21st century. We're already in the third decade here now. But as we move through this century, we are in what many people consider to be the information age. But as Chris Hayes points out, citing prior authors, economists, and the like, who have done some great work and research and really kind of philosophized about these topics, even as long as 50 years ago, some of these guys. What they point out is that information is infinite. And I think all of us who live today understand that to be the case. There's new information every day. That information can be copied and it can be spread across the world. Then there can be rumors and gossip that come from that info. You can have false information, rumors. The point is, the font that information comes from is never going to run dry. It's infinite as a resource goes. But as we as human beings consume information, what does the information consume in turn? It doesn't drink water, it doesn't eat food, it consumes our attention. Because despite all the best efforts of all the would-be multitaskers out there, we as human beings can really truly only deeply focus on one thing at a time. And this is something I laugh about to myself often because I'm somebody that goes to the gym pretty much every day. Exercising has become a critical part of my morning routine. We're lucky enough to have a little gym in the building we live in right now. So I go down there every morning. And even though it's not a public gym, believe me, there are people down there. Sometimes it's I'm all by myself, but other times there are people in the building who go down and use it as well. And some of them will be looking down at their phone while they're on the treadmill, or they'll be on the bike trying to read a book, or they flip the TV on, or whatever. And I always kind of laugh to myself because I'm like, what you're doing is you think you're doing two things at once, but you're really not doing either one very well. And I say that because if you're reading a book or you're on your phone watching something, you're not going to exercise as hard as you should be in order to get the results that you're chasing. And you're also not really absorbing to the degree that you would be if you weren't exercising, if you were focusing on it entirely. That book or the TV show that you're watching, whatever it is that you're trying to split your focus on, when you got off that treadmill, I bet if I asked you, if I had you take a quiz about what you just read or what you just watched, you would not be able to answer many questions about what you had absorbed. And at the same time, you're also not working as hard in terms of the exercise that you went there to do in the first place. So that's kind of a small example of what it is I'm talking about. We can only deeply pay attention to one thing at a time, even though people try and multitask all day. The distractions that are out there are becoming more and more compelling, and they are economically incentivized to divvy up the palette of our attention span into smaller and smaller pieces, and that is worth money. And that is one of the kind of, not just the themes of this book, A Siren's Call, but it's also just the theme of the attention economy at large, which is to say, our attention, people, you right now listening to this, or anybody else that you might talk to throughout the day, our attention and our ability to focus on things is worth money. So the phrase, pay attention, is something to be taken literally today. And so one of the things that I'm getting from this book is that as all these distractions are presenting themselves more and more, and as all of these things are trying to pull us in different directions to just squeeze off a little piece of our focus throughout the day, take that phrase, pay attention, take it literally, because it's worth money to them. It's worth money to us too. And so just try and take some inventory throughout the day and recognize, where is my attention going? What is pulling my focus? Maybe I want it to be. If you're studying for an exam, if you're spending time with a loved one, those things pull your focus, and ideally you want your focus to be on those. But there are these other things that try and pull our focus all the time that maybe you don't want to be focusing on as much as we do. Smartphones are, probably the largest example of that right now. But the apps on them, whatever screen you're talking about, tablet, computer, website, whole host of distractions out there. And if this topic interests you at all, if it doesn't, I apologize for the rant here, but if it does, The Siren's Call by Chris Hayes is a pretty good read. Just about done with it myself now, picked it up from the Chicago Public Library, of which I'm a big fan. And I do recommend the read. It's about 230 pages. It goes by pretty quick, but there's some really insightful stuff in there, particularly as we are all navigating this attention economy today, which is something I think we're all still getting our arms around, how to conduct ourselves in this day and age. Now, speaking of how to conduct yourself, I conducted myself this week. One of the ways I did anyway was by trying a cannabis product, the type of which I had never tried before. And that product is a patch, a skin patch, which goes right over one of the more vascular parts of your body. They recommend, they being the makers of this great product, which would be Nino's Naturals. And you may recall, I spoke with Narmeen Jarous on this very podcast a few weeks back. If you haven't heard that episode, I recommend you go back to it. She's a Michigan girl, dealt with a health issue for much of her young life before finding cannabis was a great solution for it. And she has been developing products in order to kind of help people along with their quality of life issues. And one of the products they made was a CBD patch. And she recommended, Narmeen, she said, either put it on your inner wrist or the top of your foot, because both of those are more vascular parts of the body. Easier access to veins. That's really the important bit. And once you put the patch on, it's got adhesive like a Band-Aid. It's circular, and you just stick it there, and if you leave it on continuously, they say you can feel the difference for 12 hours. Now, I wasn't really sure what to expect. Again, there's no THC in this thing, so this is not a party patch. This is more of an anxiety combating patch, or if you're in the case of someone like Narmeen and you've got some chronic body pain issues, it can help with that too. The things that CBD can help you with, that's what this patch would be for. But I myself was feeling a little anxious, just about life stresses, take your pick. Financial stuff, approaching birthday, wanting to be a good parent to my now 13-month-old daughter, any of these things. I was stressing out a little more than normal. Did my normal routine, exercise, meditation, little cold shower afterwards. Couldn't get my head right. And I remembered the patch that was in my drawer. And so I pulled it out and I slapped it on my wrist. And I, again, wasn't sure what to expect, but I just went about my business. And I noticed about an hour later that I felt so much more anchored and like myself than I was feeling earlier that morning. Now, I'm not somebody that I'm in the process of seeking out a therapist. I haven't gone to therapy in many years, but it's something that I am looking to get back into. But since I'm not doing it now, I don't really know about my level of anxiety or any of these things. I don't really have an official diagnosis is what I'm getting at here. I don't know that I'm like an overly anxious person. I don't think of myself that way. I use cannabis to kind of combat that on a pretty regular basis. But, sometimes the cup bubbles over. Sometimes even the methods that you use to deal with things sometimes aren't enough. Just life gets at you. And I left this patch on all day, and I have to say, like an hour later, I was just feeling so much better than I was that morning. And I had no expectations for this. I didn't go into it thinking it was going to be like a perfect solution for that particular issue I was facing that day. But it turned out to be just that. It was really, really great. And so I just want to mention, if you're somebody that, like I was saying, this particular patch it's not a party patch. It's not going to give you the THC kind of high. It's not a narcotic. It's not going to make you feel altered in that way. But if you are looking to be mellowed out a little bit, and if maybe you're facing some issues like pain, nerve pain or joint pain or something like that, this CBD patch from Nino's Naturals, this might be a kind of thing that you want to consider. One of the things Narmeen mentioned is that she's not somebody that functions well while stoned. So this CBD patch is not something that's going to get you stoned. This is meant to be leave you pretty much unaltered except for a little aid related to that anxiety or maybe whatever other discomfort that you were feeling. It can take your mind away from that. But that's about the only altering that it's going to do to you. So it's something to have on during the workday, possibly, something to have on after a workout, or just while you're going about your business. Not necessarily looking to be taken out of the world. It's not like a day drinking thing. It's just something that allows you to escape the negative quality of life issue that you were dealing with. And I just wanted to send a shout out to Narmeen because I think that's a great product. And I talked already about the gummies that they also offered and the roll-on topical, the pain relief kind of THC cream that they have. That also is really great. I've talked about those on past episodes. So if you want more details on them, check those out. But this was the first time I tried that CBD patch from Nino's Naturals, and I recommend it highly. And now, let's get into this week's expert conversation. My guest today is a true OG in the legal cannabis space. He has been in it as an executive, one of the most respected in pharmaceutical cannabis in that space today. He was an early investor in the industry in the U.S., and he is now celebrated in biopharma media as well as mainstream as an international authority on developing large-scale cannabis infrastructures across the world, as well as some of the most advanced pharmaceutical cannabinoid products. I love these new advancements in cannabinoids. We talk on the show a lot about CBN, THCV, and lots of the many others and their exciting potential. And he's also widely respected for successfully predicting long-term cannabis market trends, which anybody will tell you is a very difficult game to be playing, and he has done so successfully along with the movements and shares those across many forums. So listener, please welcome along with me Michael Sassano, CEO of SOMI Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining today.
Don, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here and talking to you from Lisbon, Portugal.
Yeah, that is amazing. And so we talked a little before the interview started, and I like to get to know you a little bit in these interviews, but you're an Ohio guy originally, and now you're overseas in Lisbon. Tell us a little about your own journey and sort of how it brought you into cannabis and then to Portugal.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Cannabis for me started as I was an investor, in the early 2008 era, right around when the real estate market wasn't doing very well. And it looked like a place for better investment as the West Coast was taking off out there. And there was medical. Remember, back then it was all medical. Where I grew up was medical. And then slowly it emerged into an operational and actually constructing the facilities and operating the facilities. Still on the West Coast, most of what I did was in Las Vegas, but then eventually branched out to other states. And then somewhere around 2020, during COVID, I thought it was a good idea to branch out and do Europe. And so I thought the American know-how, the products that Americans understood would be well received, and the industry was just starting to take off. So, watching trends from the beginning of California in the early days, medical trends, eventually recreational trends, and then now European trends across 12 operating countries and growing to 20 this year. It's quite a vision that to behold over this time.
Yeah, definitely. And that is a cool story. It is a cool journey. I think anybody who sort of makes your way away from home, away from the comforts of the U.S. where growing up, and then but following the opportunity, that is absolutely the American way. I mean, it's you look back at like the 1800s and the gold rush, that was what kind of brought people here to look at, their prosperity and the potential growth of their lives, and following that frontier, which today is the green frontier. And that's kind of what I refer to it as on the show. Watching it expand across the states recreationally, you mentioned it's been medical, especially on the West Coast for some time now. We're over 2 decades on that front. But over the last decade, it's been recreationally moving across the U.S., now across half the states. And as you mentioned, 12 European countries, hitting 20 this year. That's extremely exciting. So let me ask you, as somebody who started investing in the space and now has moved onward, what was it that made you think that cannabis was a sort of better place to park your money? And what did you see there that drew you to it that you think is still kind of sweeping it across the world now?
Yeah, I mean, and even today, we still continue to invest in the U.S. markets. My brother heads up the construction out there, building 2 new facilities as we speak. So it's the industry as a whole. If you remember, if you go back to 2008, maybe the industry was $2-3 billion legal market, and maybe 400 million then. And today, around the legal markets, it's about 40 billion. Somewhere around there, with still about the prediction, the unknown number, 200 to 400 million. The same number still keeps coming up. And it's not just about the money and the investments. Of course, that's great. We haven't, let's say the stock market hasn't performed very well. So if you keep investing in this space, you must have other reasons than just simply dollars and cents at a point. And if you watched it from a medical point of view, and even look, Florida, it's a medical market. And I would say that exact same look is almost what Germany looks like today, or Thailand, let's say. These are Thailand, $1.2 billion market, Germany trending to $1 billion market, maybe somewhere around 550 right now, but definitely on the upswing to trend there. And you're really bringing great products to people in a more safe environment. And, although we are pharmaceutical, the nuance is a difference of there's a doctor in between giving a prescription, whereas your choice, you have 1,300 SKUs in Australia. You've got 850 SKUs in Germany, 550 SKUs in the UK. So now the selection of legal product far outweighs the selection that you could get in the underground. And recently there was a study that was done out of Germany where they tested the underground products, and about 76% came, maybe it was 74, don't quote me there, but some high number came out with a lot of contaminants, from heavy metals to pesticides, to other drugs that you don't really need that's in their watering systems. So this is more of an eye-opener over here, and bringing better products is what's needed for the European markets, and they deserve better products, whether they're medical or trending direct.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up a lot of good points there, Michael, and I appreciate it. That global perspective you bring is really fascinating. Being here in Chicago, those contaminants you talked about, that's a big issue here as well. Across the states, you've got, whether it's the big MSOs, the multi-state operators, or smaller businesses, which are kind of just getting their foot in the door, there are great actors in the cannabis space. I've spoken with them on the show who take great pains not to spray anything on their farms, and they do things to try and really control what goes into the ultimate plant product. But to your point, there are plenty of other examples after being tested in these state markets where these products, of which there are so many to choose from, end up with things, whether unintended or, for whatever reason, just kind of intended, if it's pesticides or whatever, those things end up in the final product that consumers are getting and putting into their bodies. And so not only do you have this issue of people recreationally going into a dispensary and choosing from between, as you put it, like 500, sometimes more than that, SKUs on store shelves. These sometimes are people who have no experience in the past using cannabis. They might just be getting into it now because it's been legal where they live, and they want to try and address a specific quality of life issue, like chronic body pain or trouble getting to sleep, anxiety, any one of the long lists that cannabis can kind of help with. But then they get in, they work up the courage and they get into a dispensary only to hear a bud tender scrolling through this menu, and you see their eyes start to spin because it's that paralysis of choice. Anybody who tries to scroll on Netflix and pick something to watch knows what the being frozen with too many options feels like. And that is happening right now in the cannabis space. And I always joke about, back in the old days of the black market when you just had your dealer or your plug, you just dealt with whatever they had. You might, if you were lucky, you might have been able to choose like, oh, he's got strawberry cough today, or she's got some blue dream, but I'm going to choose between like the three. I'm not choosing between hundreds. And that issue is something that makes it difficult for people to kind of, I think, get on this train. But I do want to ask, from the pharmaceutical standpoint, what do you look for? I mean, we're talking about SOMI, which is the company that you're involved with right now, and your approach to products in different markets. What is it? We kind of touched on it a little before, but what benefits do a pharmaceutical cannabis product offer that maybe non-pharma companies making cannabis products? How does that compare for the consumer?
Yeah, great question. Pharmaceuticals, the short answer is we're almost bringing the exact same products as the American market. Even gummy bears as an example. We call them oral gums, and we put it in a blister package as opposed to toss it in a tin and put some sugar on it so they don't stick. There's rosins, there's resins, there's vaporizers. Different markets have different things, but the predominant form out there are oral drops. And once you're at a pharmaceutical level, the regulations and the quality controls are exactly what you would expect of any medicine that you consume in the United States or anywhere. You can imagine clean room technology. Although we have very similar facilities in the United States, the technology is different. The flow of the rooms are different. The cleaning protocols are different. As an example, one clean room here will sweep out the air every 20 seconds, and it's only cleaned with ethanol as opposed to water because water is a contaminant.
Right.
And so, each room you can only make one action happen. So if you're going to extract, and then you're going to formulate, and then you're going to primary package, and then you're going to secondary package. Those are all separate rooms, and they all have to have equipment that's registered under a pharmaceutical called EU GMP rating. So the complexities are much higher. The product ends up being the same or very similar if you have the U.S. know-how how to make it. And if you're a little creative, you can have a lot of fun with making terpene variations, flavonoid variations and things that make the experience more interesting for the user, and still either achieve very high performing products like a resin or concentrate or rosin, or extracts for people that are lighter users, novel new users, soccer moms, whatever. You have to make the range. And what we did is we started making them, and we make about 134 different SKUs today, which is the largest portfolio in the global markets. But each one of these SKUs, imagine, takes 1 year of stability because they have to have a shelf life on them.
Mm-hmm.
So our products have a shelf life based upon how long it sat in a stability chamber. So you not only have different manufacturing techniques, different equipment you have to use that's pharmaceutical grade, you also have major reporting systems and shelf lives to contend with, plus global supply chains, rather than just interstate travel, airplane travel. Those vapes going up in an airplane, poof, if you don't package them right. So we seal them in a glass container with nitrogen, flip them upside down so that the air won't escape from the top. And we deal with pressurization issues. So there's a whole host of issues we have to do. But I would say the actual product itself, we tried to make it just what U.S. consumers want, because they're solving a problem. Their consumer preference is patient preference today.
Yeah, another great, set of points that you made there, Michael. I think the people have different opinions. I know here in the States, people I talk to on the show, they have different opinions about pharmaceuticals, sort of entering into the cannabis space, maybe because of all the propaganda from last century, the idea of, a major industry sort of, compared to like a mom and pop farm, like a smaller business. I know people have their different opinions about it, but when you put it like that, where you talk about the resources that you have and the standards that your products are measured against, not just in terms of the travel, but even that amount of cleaning the clean rooms and how each different step of the process requires a different room, I think that more people are going to want that kind of confidence in what they're putting in their bodies. So I do take that as a big benefit for what you're talking about. I also want to bring up the idea of regulation, because here in the States, it's like every state's its own island in terms of legality, right? I'm here in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, still illegal. Michigan is legal. So it's like I can take my product and take it to Michigan. That's fine, but I got to drive through Indiana and Wisconsin where it's like, still not okay. And that's the case across a lot of the country. And obviously it's very much the case in Europe as well. You've got spots of legality, but you bring up the example of Thailand. That is one that I've been tracking the last couple of years, watching it flip-flop from legal, or rather prohibited, to like fully legal, and then they were dancing back to illegal again, and now the PM says, well, I think we're going to keep it as is. So I want to ask you, coming from the pharmaceutical side and where you are, spread out this amount in the States as well as the global aspect of it, how difficult is it to navigate this hodgepodge regulation of stuff and deal with countries like Thailand that are kind of maybe changing their minds?
Yeah, I mean, regulations have always been the Achilles heel of the cannabis industry. There's always been bigger forces at play, suppressing the growth and the education and the outreach for the patient or the end client. The lucky thing for when we're an EU GMP manufacturing, and we also have a cultivation facility. And so that cultivation facility, as an example, is home of Cookies, which is, U.S., one of the biggest brands in the United States today.
Yep.
And so this is on one side, we can move our product from one location to many countries because we're what you call EU GMP pharmaceutical grade, which means there's a standardization which is accepted across all supply lines. And so your end distributor is the pharmacy. And once you're an EU GMP pharmaceutical grade product, any pharmacy, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands, can carry your product. Or like you may have read recently, there may be some changes to the veterans of the United States. Well, guess what? More than likely, those programs are going to require a medical rated product because that's what doctors can prescribe medicine. Now, the U.S. has made their rules the way they've made them state by state, but when you're able to address address multi-countries and multiple jurisdictions out of one facility, you get a better, let's say, economies of scale in what you're trying to achieve. And so like Thailand is an example of the flip-flop. The reality is they went, and I travel there, I'm on my way there again this month.
Nice.
The reality is they went so far to one side. They went from you're going to jail forever to you go into Thailand and there's cannabis everywhere. There's stores everywhere. I called a friend and I was coming in from Japan and I said, hey, can you hook me up with somebody in Thailand? They go, Mike, you don't need it. The chicken guy was trying to sell me cannabis.
Oh my God.
What really was supposed to be a medical market became something different. And they are going to, let's say, not rein it in, but for at least the sake of their neighboring countries, which are very strict, like China and Singapore and stuff like that, they're going to have to put up the image that they are a medical market, because without that medical status, you are confined, just like the United States, to a state-by-state recommendation because you've gone against the 1971 Narcotics Act. But if you're medical and you're pharmaceutical grade product, you can go to any country that accepts it. And so, our addressable markets are much larger than state by state, and you need a certain category. Even like hemp in the United States is GMP now. Now, people may not subscribe to it, but the fact is it must be, and that's for international commerce as well as local commerce to develop. Your water bottles are GMP. Everything you use is GMP, good manufacturing practices. Now, whether your pharmaceutical grade is a completely different thing, or your novel foods like hemp, but still that classification is very important to the distribution of it. So I'm hoping, to see more out of the United States. You said I was a great predictor of the markets. I've been the worst. I thought for sure Schedule 3 was a slam dunk before the election.
Yeah.
I thought no way were they going to miss that one.
Yeah.
And at least if we go Schedule 3, which is just common sense, to be honest, it's really almost silly that it's even a debate anymore. I think the HHS testimony in August said the negative sides of cannabis are that of caffeine.
Yeah.
I think they said it twice in their report.
Yeah.
And if that's your case, give me a break.
Totally. It's frustrating for a lot of people, obviously, and the fact that the DEA is a part of this process still is such a joke. Like they're I've said it many times. It's their self-interest to keep the status quo as it is, and the Schedule 1 not acknowledging any medical benefit when states around the country, almost 40 now, and then these countries around the world are all acknowledging the medical benefit and going against that sort of policy. It's just so foolish. I think everybody can see that it's a joke and that schedule needs to be changed. But something else you brought up that I find interesting is the hemp versus cannabis debate, which is happening right now, certainly in the States. Some states are looking to ban intoxicating hemp. Others are looking to regulate it in the same way that cannabis is done. From somebody with SoMi Pharmaceuticals, and you guys are doing a lot to make sure that your cannabis products are the best and pharmaceutical grade, as you've been mentioning. What's your opinion about hemp, and where do you see this sort of battle going?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a different category, right? So it's novel foods over here as well as it is over there. To us, as a pharmaceutical, we do have a medical CBD products to round out the portfolio of different THC products. So we do manufacture them. They're way more expensive than a product you can get from a drugstore. I think it's difficult, as you pointed out earlier. How do you know you're getting the right stuff? I get that question all the time. And like my parents' friends, Mike, what's the best CBD? I'm like, I really don't know. I mean, it's so difficult for me to be able to predict it because there's not enough information for me to make that. So you got to go with the best ratings, and assume that those are correct. When it comes to like an intoxicating product, I mean, it does say that that's what people are looking for. As long as it's not a surprise to people, then I think I'm a little better with that. Cannabis, if you're buying cannabis from a dispensary, you know what you're getting in for, or at least you're semi-aware. But if you're going to you stop by a gas station, you pick up a CBD, it's Delta 8, it's Delta 10, Delta O, whatever it is now, and suddenly you pop that, you're in the car, and an hour later you're flying,
Yep.
and you're not used to it. I think that's a dangerous thing. And so as long as people are aware of what they're getting, I think it's much better, and I think a little education would go a long way with the changes in those products to make it more, let's say, the efficacy better, and a little bit more education and labeling would go a long way. But the FDA doesn't seem to want to touch it after Congress passed it. So, here there's a continual debate. One day everybody's okay with it, and the next day it's like, okay, that's intoxicating, that's out, banned.
Yep.
And so, I think that's the general trend. If it does make you high, it probably needs to have some sort of information on it, would be my guess. But I'm not a regulator. I just kind of follow the things. But I think there is great usage though for CBD, especially anti-inflammatory effects and high dosages for sports people and older people that can't take products that are intoxicating. There's so many good uses.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. That's part of that complexity. It's hard to just throw up one wall one way or the other because it is important for some people, especially if they live in a non-legal state without access to proper cannabis. For some people that is medicine, and I take your point. I think it's important that they can get that stuff. One other thing that I want to ask you about is, that the idea of the attention to detail going into these products, and whether hemp, like we mentioned, CBD, or these cannabis ones. I want to ask, the brands under SOMI Pharmaceuticals umbrella, how can people find where they can get access to the products of SOMI, and is there a store locator or anything like that where they can see where they'd be able to get this stuff?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I don't know. Surprisingly, I could pretty much answer any question but that one.
I get you.
Pharmaceuticals are you can't advertise pharmaceuticals, and so unlike the United States where you could have commercials about them.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. That's not okay in Europe, but here we see them all the time.
Yeah, I'd like to do advertisements out of the United States for that sake, just so you know.
Yeah.
I mean, being multi-country. I'd like to take advantage of that just to educate people better, really, is what my thought is. Luckily, if you're going to be in the UK, Germany, Australia, Switzerland, I could name 12 countries, Czech, Ireland. If you're in any of these countries and you go to a doctor and you get a prescription of cannabis, you will be able to say, I want SOMI products, and you will be able to fulfill that at just about any pharmacy. Either they'll have it at a pharmacy in a main city, or it'll have to be delivered to you within one day, some countries a little bit longer. But the pharmacy network, telehealth is very big, so you can get it online with the doctor's appointment in 10 minutes, or you could go brick and mortar. But for people traveling to Europe and don't want to bring their product with them, probably a smart thing, traveling and cannabis, although we think it's normal on the West Coast. For sure. It's not so normal in Europe. You may want to get a prescription when you come into those countries. They're really easy to get, especially Germany. Like, anybody could get a prescription and service that day.
That's great. Yeah, and I've heard that, and I love what Germany's doing. You talked a little about I love that you brought up the comparison between Germany and kind of Florida as a strictly medical market, and little pieces, areas of Germany that are okay for it. But I think so far they've done really well. They tend, I think, mostly to take a responsible approach to progressive stuff like that. But I want to ask, that's great to know in Europe. Is there a difference here in the States? Because they're, not just in terms of prescriptions of pharmacies, but are they on store shelves, what you guys have in any U.S. dispensaries, or would they get them here the same way they would in Europe?
No, SOMI is international without the United States. We're currently working with, I believe it's called Veterans Affairs.
Okay.
And so I think that's their name. Don't quote me on that. But we're working to bring veterans the medical grade THC oral drops. We want to be there, but the United States is its own special bubble.
Sure.
For all pharmaceuticals. It's completely different stuff than the rest of the world. EU GMP can travel to any country as the gold standard, but the United States.
Wow.
So the United States has its own separate pharma industry, completely closed off. However, we do believe that through the Veterans Association, about 2 years ago, there was some cannabis shipped EU GMP from Uruguay and for medical purposes. So there is the precedent that it can happen. It's not like a large market because you can get what you want at a dispensary. My 80-year-old parents go to a dispensary.
Sure.
Even if my product was there, I'm not even quite sure they would use that because they like their little low-dose gummy bear.
Yeah.
So what can I say? But we're hopeful, and we want to bring the medical grade to the veterans if that's what's needed to satisfy the demand, and they can't get it regular via dispensaries and the state systems.
I think that that's great. I do think that there is a big need and a demand here for that. And I'm just thrilled to hear that veterans are where you guys are focusing, because I know that they're a big group in this country that, needs more access. But as you said, there are plenty of people who can just go to the dispensary and get what they need, which is really cool. Michael, last question I want to ask you is, I know we were joking before about sort of like the trends. The future is always impossible to predict. The best thing to do is once something happens, you just, point to something that you had written down or whatever and say, oh yeah, see, like I was right about that. It's really hard to quantify the future, especially with something as, fluid as cannabis is around the world. But I want to ask you, with the global perspective and the pharmaceutical sort of angle that you've been occupying the last few years here, where do you see things going in the next 5 to 10 years? Growth is going to be there, but I guess I want to ask you, if people are, interested in looking to invest, if people are looking for areas of cannabis to sort of put their money into, what would you advise them to do? And I this is not like an investment advice show or anything, so I'm always very, I'm cautious. People, do your research and all of that, but just taking your perspective about this and seeing it the way that you do, what do you see in that regard over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that on a medical basis, and I'm going to explain what I mean by medical, but medical grade products, medical framework, this is sweeping the globe right now. And so, although the United States and then Canada fell suit, and these are your two largest markets, the global market in total is your third largest market, and it'll be your second largest market. And the EU will probably lead that. Countries like Australia are very large also, just a little bit smaller than Germany currently. But you have so many new countries popping up every day. And so it's Spain's coming online, France is coming online. It's just incredible the amount of countries coming online. Now, regulations take a little bit of time. And so in my belief, the future over the next 5 years is really a global sweep of medical. And I believe medical will be divided into medical heavy, and I'm making those words up, by the way. There's no such thing as medical heavy, but medical heavy and medical light, all right? And what I mean by medical heavy is very serious countries We'll start with indications that make sense for them: epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, stage 3 cancer. And then, as you pointed out earlier, medical light adds in, anxiety, stress, sleep, and any one of those million categories that we all appreciate cannabis for. And so what may start as medical heavy, Ireland, Czech, currently, they've all said they're going to a more medical light where any GP can prescribe it for almost any indication, similar to Germany. Now, Germany went the extra step and took the narcotic symbol off. So that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I'm not certain that other countries will follow necessarily that, but they may follow that medical light and making it easier for anybody to access cannabis for whatever reason that they're looking for cannabis to solve. And I think that's a trend that, although you can't put money on, that's a trend that's going to occur, whether the forces to be, big pharma or whoever is trying to stop it, are failing right now in large degrees. And I do point out the HHS 252-page report, which basically said cannabis is safer, and they use that word, than all the other alternatives to pharma out there. And they said it's good for at least 15 indications. As the cannabis community knows, there's way more than just 15. And now likening it to caffeine in the most recent testimony, and Germany taking narcotics off. These are pillars that say, look, it's good for your population, and people deserve a chance to try something that's less harmful. And even if it's to bring down, copious amounts of alcohol consumption that we've seen in states that have legalized, even if that's the result, maybe that's going to be better for the liver and other things. So there's a lot of benefits that regulators are starting to look at and starting to address. And even, we will always be participating with the illicit market, and that may be just fine. You can't stop everything in the world, but at least give them the option so they have a choice, and they're making a conscious choice. And if that's their choice, great, so be it.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think you point out how cannabis is truly presenting itself as the great alternative to alcohol. Certainly, we see in the states where it's been legalized, those rates of consumption of alcohol drop across the board. You talk about the pharmaceutical side of it. I've been reading articles these last few weeks about how opioid overdoses drop as well, and opiate use disorder, all of those things, which are a big part of pharmaceutical prescriptions, certainly here in the U.S. for a lot of different things. Cannabis offers an alternative for that, as well as a ramp downward for those people that are using those things. And that, among so many other of the issues that you just laid out, are why cannabis is going to keep expanding, especially on the medical side. And it is very, very exciting to continue to watch it happen. And listener, if you're in Europe, if you're traveling outside the U.S. and you want some high quality pharmaceutical grade clean cannabis that has been absolutely looked after in the best way possible, look for SoMai Pharmaceuticals products. Ask your doctor when you go there about those. You can get a prescription. And CEO of SoMai, Michael Sassano, thank you so much for stopping by today, sharing your great perspective on it, and telling everybody what we can look forward to in the future of cannabis here.
Thanks for having me on, Don. Really appreciate it.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Michael Sassano, CEO of SoMai Pharmaceuticals, doing really impressive work, jumping through all of the hoops of European regulation. I mentioned during the interview that I make the example all the time. I use the analogy of every state being its own island in terms of cannabis law, but SoMai is actually operating on different islands and among different countries, and those having different cannabis laws themselves. So at least here, the states might be their own thing, but there's still a federal overarching, law system. There's still the DEA, there's still the federal system and how it relates to cannabis. You have got nothing like that as SoMai Pharmaceuticals. They are bouncing around and helping cannabis move medically across the countries that give it the green light for that. And as Michael was talking about, it's a very exciting time because regardless of what's happening here in the States, especially with the rescheduling and how long this is taking, and I've got some topic to tell you about relating to that as well, but no matter what, the medical momentum for cannabis is undeniable. It's part of why it's such a joke that they haven't rescheduled it yet. Schedule 1 means that they don't acknowledge any medical value from it. And yet, country after country, state after state, are falling in line and giving the green light to cannabis medically because they are acknowledging the medical benefits that it can offer. And a company like SOMI Pharmaceuticals is really laying the groundwork and establishing a foundation for a global company to provide pharmaceutical-grade cannabis, reliable products in terms of regulations, in terms of standards, not just of creation, but then of care and storage and all these things. That is critically important as many and more countries are allowing medical cannabis. Having a company that you can rely on in terms of quality and exactly the kind of symptom address that you're looking for. A company like SOMI is really doing important stuff to get that going. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really loved talking with them, and I'm definitely going to be paying attention to what SOMI does here in this near future as cannabis is getting more and more legalized medically around the world. Now, speaking of the future of cannabis, I'm going to turn it back to the States here for my news wrap-up. I've got some headlines that I want to share with you, and we're going to start in the southern U.S. at Texas. The House in that state passed a bill banning the sale and possession of THC cannabis products. This is a CBSNews.com article published May 22nd, so just yesterday from when I'm recording this, by Marissa Armas. The author says that bill passed the House late Wednesday night. In a 95-44 vote, Senate Bill 3 passed the House banning all THC products. Adults would face up to a year in jail for possession of any THC product. Now, the article goes on to note THC is an $8 billion industry in Texas. Critics have said that many local businesses will be impacted by the ban. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who championed the bill, thanked lawmakers for passing it and said it's about protecting kids and adults. Now, I'm going to skip the quote from the Lieutenant Governor here. Senate Bill 3, authored by Senator Charles Perry, bans Delta 8, Delta 9, and all other forms of intoxicating THC, including beverages. It also prohibits the retail sale of any cannabinoid in the state, with the exception of CBD and CBG. Interesting allowances there. CBD I expect, but I have to say it's a little surprising to see CBG included in that exception. I'm into it. I'm glad that they do, because it at least allows for some products there, and it notes that over the past decade, thousands of CBD shops have opened across Texas, selling cannabis products with varying levels of THC, which, as the article notes, has the psychoactive effect. And then they go on to talk about the Farm Bill of 2018, which legalized hemp up to that 0.3% THC level. And as I've talked about a lot on the show, they kind of parse the nuances of what the Farm Bill did, which was, whether they meant to or not, it legalized THC up to 0.3% across the country. So that's why you see these hemp markets and these products making their way across the country, even though in certain states cannabis might not be legal. A hemp product with lower than 0.3% THC can be sold there like anything else. Anyway, that's all this article I'm going to read. I just wanted to let you know that bill passed the Texas House. And there's nothing in this article about what comes next. So I will be looking into that in terms of if this goes to the governor's desk now and if this bill banning the sale is now just the law of the land. But I've linked this below in the description notes. You can check that out for yourself. Another topic related to cannabis here in the U.S. are something that a lot of people have been talking about this year. It might end up being the word of the year, that being tariffs. If you're at all plugged into economic news or anything like that, you have heard about tariffs. As President Trump was inaugurated in January, that was one of his first big modus operandi, was establishing some tariffs and, sort of juggling, let's say, the arrangements of trade around the world, and that is still kind of being shaken out here. But there's an article from ohyeahweed.com, which I've never been to before, and I gotta say, I just love the name. That tickles me. But they've got a business section, and Nicole Flanagan published this article on May 20th, How Trump's Tariffs Could Reshape the U.S. Cannabis Industry. Now, I've linked this one below as well. I typically do with these news stories. But I'll read a little bit here. When people think of trade wars, cannabis probably isn't the first industry that comes to mind. But while the plant itself isn't crossing international borders, legally anyway, the materials and tools used to grow, process, and package it often are. Under President Donald Trump's trade policies, both from his first term and new proposals emerging this year, tariffs have expanded beyond legacy sectors like steel and automobiles to include a wide range of industrial, agricultural, and consumer goods. That includes many of the products cannabis businesses rely on every day. Grow lights, steel frames, climate systems, vape hardware, and packaging materials. Although cannabis isn't directly targeted in tariff negotiations, the industry has become one of many caught in the crossfire of broader U.S.-China trade tensions. As new tariffs roll out and older ones persist, operators across the U.S. are seeing rising costs, shifting supply chains, and new questions about long-term sustainability in an already challenging market. This is a long article, so long that they have a table of contents for it, and they look back. Tariffs expanded in 2018 and 19. They talk about infrastructure costs going up due to the steel and aluminum tariffs, and they break it down into various categories, talking about vape hardware specifically feeling the pinch of these tariffs. Everyday costs rising, and then trying to plan around uncertainty, which is kind of the name of the game regarding cannabis. I mean, I talked with Michael Sassano. He said a great line in there about how regulations have always been the Achilles heel of the cannabis industry. That's certainly as true today as it was, 50 years ago. And then down low in the article, looking ahead where tariffs might take the cannabis industry, and they kind of break down what might happen here in terms of global perception, federal legalization becoming an economic lever that might be pulled in this tariff sort of battle that we're seeing play out here, and a whole lot more. So this is one of those articles that's got a ton of information. If you've got some time to set aside and you're looking to read something, you got a long commute, or you've got some distraction-free time and you're looking to kind of fill that up, this is a great article from ohyeahweed.com. I've linked this below as well. Nice job, Nicole Flanagan, trying to kind of parse out a ton of information and basically, straddle the various nuances of not just cannabis, which again, the regulations are tough to predict and tough to kind of suss out as they are anyway. But now adding these tariffs on top of it, it is really made for some murky waters, and this is an article that I think really kind of captures all that stuff nicely. Now, speaking of the rescheduling stuff, we talked about it, myself and Michael Sassano, in this interview of this episode. We talked about rescheduling, and there was an article this week from marijuanamoment.net. I use them all the time. I encourage you to subscribe. It's a great publication. I do a lot of sharing of their articles on the show here. But Kyle Yeager published this one on May 21st this week. Marijuana rescheduling blocked by opposition from within DEA. Biden's drug czar says. I've linked this below. Feel free to follow along or read it at your leisure. Former President Joe Biden's drug czar says the process to reschedule marijuana, as initiated under the last administration, may have been compromised by officials within the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, which was supposed to be defending the proposed policy change. If only someone had been saying that for the last year plus at this point. If only there was somebody out here who was trying to tell people the DEA is not a neutral party and there's no way that they're going to not put their thumb on the scale here and try and preserve the status quo. Who might that have been? Yes, Violet, that's right. It was me. And I'm not one to necessarily just try and pat myself on the back or take credit, but it is my birthday weekend, and this continues to frustrate me. I mean, it just seems so freaking obvious to me and to anybody paying attention to this. Why in the hell is a non-neutral party in the court system being called as a witness and being allowed to call up experts and all of this in this process, which they clearly have a vested interest in a specific outcome? Why is the DEA even in this process? And now, We have word from the White House itself, from President Joe Biden's drug czar, the former president. Now it's a new administration, but the drug czar is the same. And he says the DEA actually held up this process. So I don't really know that there's going to be any more definitive confirmation than that. But I'm just going to say it one last time. I frickin' told you so. At the same time, the article goes on, a pro-legalization former OP congressman allied with President Donald Trump is raising questions about the sincerity of the current president's endorsement of rescheduling on the campaign trail. About 4 months into Trump's second term, there still has been no movement on the pending plan to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act, leaving advocates and stakeholders frustrated, both by the current inaction but also the Biden administration's failure to get the job done before the transition. According to former White House Office of National Drug Control Policy Director Rahul Gupta, that may have been due to deliberate resistance from within the DEA. A suspicion shared widely among supporters of the reform, including those involved in an administrative hearing that's been stalled for months, with no clear indication it will proceed any time soon. Quote, "We got stuck moving at the slow speed of government, which also was marred potentially by some opposing it from within," Gupta told the New York Times as part of a broader story examining the rescheduling effort. The article also features interviews with former senior DEA agent and former Rep. Matt Gaetz, who notably suggested that Trump's endorsement of a Schedule 3 classification on the campaign trail was essentially an attempt to shore up support among young voters rather than a sincere reflection of his personal views about cannabis. As far as speculation about DEA's role in the protracted process goes, there are several factors that have led many to conclude the agency's leadership internally is opposed the proposal, including the fact that there was a break in precedent when then Attorney General Merrick Garland signed off on it after the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services made the recommendation. Historically, the DEA administrator approves drug scheduling proposals. But again, in this case, that didn't happen. Attorney General Garland was the one to do that. DEA had also previously raised a series of questions about the scientific review that served as the basis of its recommendation that some interpreted to mean it disagreed about the assessments about marijuana's medical value and relatively low abuse potential, even though the agency technically serves as the proponent of the rule in since stalled administrative hearings. Others have alleged DEA had improper communication with prohibitionist witnesses in the lead-up to the proceedings. What happens next in the process is uncertain, as we all continue to hold our collective breath and thumb our noses, I suppose, or stick our thumbs wherever, I guess, because this doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. And as I have talked at length on the show, as I've said many times, and as I have reiterated with guest after guest on this program, we shouldn't be holding our breath. As much as it makes sense, as much as it seems logical, and as much as it seems like it was right there, there's no telling if or when this rescheduling is actually now going to happen under this administration. We may not get this administrative hearing we were supposed to get in January. We may not get this for the next 4 freaking years. So, happy birthday to me, I guess. Wop, 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 wop. Yeah, so that sucks. That's about all I'm going to read of this because I just can't take anymore. I have linked it below. There's plenty more to go through and more good information, as there always is by Marijuana Moment reporting. The last one I'm going to share with you is on a more uplifting note. I like this one. This is out of normal.org. My friends from there, Paul Armentano in particular, always putting out great stuff in terms of op-eds, opinion pieces, in terms of some new findings. And this one falls under that category. There was a clinical trial, and this was published yesterday from when I'm recording this, May 22nd. The trial showed daily use of hemp-derived CBD reduces alcohol cravings. This is out of Colorado, Aurora, Colorado specifically. The daily consumption of hemp-derived CBD is associated with reduced cravings for alcohol in subjects diagnosed with alcohol use disorder, according to the clinical trial data published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry. Investigators affiliated with the University of Colorado's Anschutz Medical Campus assessed the use of CBD versus a placebo in a cohort of 44 adults with AUD. That's that alcohol use disorder. Participants consumed 15 milligram capsules containing hemp-derived CBD either with or without THC or a placebo for 8 weeks. Patients were assessed at baseline 4 weeks, 8 weeks, and 16 weeks. Researchers reported that daily CBD consumption reduced participants' alcohol cravings with, quote, minimal side effects. Participants who consumed CBD with trace amounts of THC demonstrated stronger improvements in AUD symptoms relative to those who consumed CBD only. However, CBD dosing didn't directly influence the number of drinks participants consumed per day. There's a quote here, results suggest good tolerability, low potential for adverse effects, and potential clinical efficacy, supporting the rationale for additional investigations, the study's authors concluded. Future studies should prioritize large, well-powered RCTs, which are randomized clinical trials, to validate these preliminary findings in individuals with varying AUD severity and treatment histories, end quote. The results of a 2024 randomized clinical trial similarly concluded that the oral administration of 800 milligrams of synthetic CBD significantly reduced subjects' cravings for alcohol. There's a little more to go in that article, but I've linked it below and I'll leave it there so you can read that bit for yourself. Definitely throw NORML a click. I recommend you read all these articles that I share with you, but if you only got a little bit of time here, this NORML one is definitely the least depressing of the bunch that I shared today. So that's why I felt like ending on a little bit of a high note there, pun intended. And of course, I also love to end on an even higher note with a haiku. So, as I sip this Wink Mandarin Pomelo, got a little hyped up there. I felt like I needed to quench the thirst. I was a little bit parched, but
that's enough.
Yes, that is enough of news. That's enough of the negative stuff. And now
I'm getting high on reefer.
Yeah, Niles knows it. I'm actually getting high on a beverage form of it here with Wink, but it's time for the haiku. So however you would prefer to take in your reefer, whether it be a joint, a blunt, get your dab rig up and going, heat up that little chamber there with your blowtorch, crack a beverage like I did earlier, crack into your gummy or your chocolate, or slap on a patch because it's time for the haiku, read this week by my friend Reg Kiefer. Take it away, Reg. Sip, stick, spark the night. Birthday breeze and THC. Cheers to greener days. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. That's for you there, Don. Happy birthday, my man. Hey, thanks, Reg. I appreciate that. Here, I thought I'd have this for you. I got you a little something. I thought maybe you'd be into that. I don't know. This is a burnt weed nug. Yeah, I vaped it. Thought I'd, you can do something with that. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I could throw it in the oven or something, but I need a lot more than this to actually have any effect. If I was going to make brownies or something like that, it would need to be like an eighth or a quad or something. This is just a little nug. This is like just a piece of ash. It's just staining my fingers. Oh, well, you're ruining it now, but just happy birthday, man. I'm going to go and I'm going to go smoke with the boys. I'll see you later. Yeah, see you later, Reg. That's very kind of you. I'm throwing that away now, and thank you for putting up with that, listener. As always, thank you. I apologize for that and for everything else, and I Can't thank you enough for sticking it out with me for another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. If you wanted to weigh in on anything that I shared during this week's episode, feel free to call or text 872-269-2403. You'll reach the Cannabis Man podcast that way. I want to thank my guest, Michael Sassano, CEO of SOMI Pharmaceuticals. As I mentioned, if you are in a medically legal European country, very easy, as he mentioned, in places like Germany, to get a prescription the same day, see a doctor, get medically prescribed, and then you can ask for SOMI products. Give those a try. Let me know what you think. I want to thank my friends at Wink. Great job on the new flavor, Mandarin Pomelo. Very subtle, very fun, perfect for summer. And thank you, Narmeen Jarus of Nino's Naturals, for the CBD patch. That was something that was unexpectedly perfect for my needs that one day I was feeling more anxious than normal. Hope you enjoyed everything I brought you. Please leave a rating or a review if you did. If you made it to the end here, bravo, good for you, and thanks a lot. Enjoy this Memorial Day weekend. Spend some time with those you love. Get out there. It's not, if you're in Chicago or the Midwest, it may not be as warm as we had hoped for a kickoff of summer like this normally is, but still should be sunny, still should be beautiful out there, clear skies, and always a great time to spend time with those you love and ideally enjoy some wonderful cannabis with them. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk next week on the Cannabis Man podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.